Welcome to lesson 8-8, multiplication as scaling. Please make sure you write the topic multiplication as scaling at the top of your page. That is a good avid strategy. You could even date it. You'd be one up and everything. Your I can statement is I can compare the size of the product. If you want to remember product, oh, I had picked red for the chips, but it's not working. There we go. A product is the answer to a multiplication problem. So I can compare the size of the product to the size of one factor. Factors are two numbers you multiply together to get the product. So these are called factors, just to review some math terminology. Without multiplying, to consider multiplication as scaling. So you have to write that whopping I can statement down on your paper, which is actually a really good one. And in my head, I'm figuring out what it means. So I can compare the size of the product. You're going to know kind of what your answer will be to the size of one factor without multiplying to consider multiplication as scaling. Kind of as I'm talking, you can write that down, but I may use estimation as a tool to help me with this today. That's a wonderful strategy to use when you think of what your product may be close to as you look at the factors. So if you're still writing it, go ahead and push pause and then push play when you're done. So now we're looking at our solve and share. And first off, one of the things that I really want you to do for this problem is I want you to write set 1, set 2, and set 3 on your paper underneath the solution side. I know that you have it glued in, but on the solution side, I want you to write set 1, set 2, set 3, so you can record your thinking and processing through each one. So the problem says, without multiplying, circle the problem in each set with the greatest product and underline the problem with the least product. So there are two things that we are doing. First, you're going to circle the problem with the greatest product, and you're going to underline the problem with the least product. So as a learner, if you want to write, and let's just go ahead and do it. I think everybody should be visualizing this and writing down what you need to do. You're going to circle the greatest, and you are going to underline the least. So you need to do that in set 1, set 2, and set 3. So let's begin. So when we look at A, first off under set 1, that says a half times 2. Well, that's just taking, what is a half times 2? A half times 2 would be 1. Just like, for example, I cannot write today. Just like, for example, if you took a half times 3, your answer would be half. If you took a half times 4, your answer would be 2. Now here we're going to look at 3 over 3. Well, when your numerator and your denominator are the same, that represents 1 whole. So what is 1 times 2? That is 2. Then we look at 5/4. Well, that's an improper fraction, so that means there is a whole in that number. Now, how many wholes? Only 1, because 4/4 is 1 whole. So we have 1 and 1/4 times 2. So when I look at set 1, I'm going to know that C is the greatest. And then if we were to underline the least product, well, a half times 2 is 1. And then that would be 1 times 2, and that's 2. So the least would be A. So pretty easy when we think of multiplication using scaling to understand set A. So now we're going to look at set 2. We have 3 3/4 times 2 1/2. So if I look at this estimation wise, 3/4 is pretty close to one whole. So this would be like 4 times 2.5. So 4 times 2.5, and that would be more like 3. So 4 times 3 is 12. We can think of it that way. Then 3/4 could be close to 1, and then 2.5 would be 3. So 1 times 3 is 3. You could do this in your head. I just want to write it down for you. 4/4, well, that's 1. So 1 times 2.5 is 3. We're estimating. Remember, we're estimating. So here we look a lot at that. Now, clearly the greatest one will be A. And then when we look back through on what would be the least one, well, it would be 3/4 times 2.5, because 3/4 is less than 1 whole. Oh, lots of fun here. Okay, now we're going to look at set 3. 3/4 could be close to 1, and 6/6 is 1, so 1 times 1 would be 1. 3/4 could be estimated to 1. Oh, and 5/6 would be 1, so that would be 2, because that 5/6 would be 1 whole. So 1 plus 1 is 2. So if we do 1 times 2, we would get 2. 3/4 could be estimated to 1, and 5/6 could be estimated to 1. So our estimate would be 1. But so now clearly the greatest one is going to be B. That's obvious. But when it comes to which one is the least, well, you have to look. Well, 3/4 times 6/6. Well, 6/6 is exactly 1 whole. 5/6 is not. So that means the least one would be C. So, a couple things. I used estimating to kind of help me solve the problem, and common sense over what I know about fractions. And we also, when we looked at the solve and share, we really processed through it to help us make sense of it. And that's what you need to make sure that you do. So we are going to look at Rhonda's work. And Rhonda, and this is only for set 2. So that's important to understand. And it says, how did Rhonda use number sense to circle the greatest product and underline the least product? So as you've noticed, she circled the first one and she underlined the middle one, which is exactly what we did. So thank goodness we were right. Because the second factor was 2.5 in each pair, Rhonda only had to compare the first factors. So she knew that this would be the greatest because 3 3/4 was the largest fraction. And she knew this would be the smallest because 3/4 was smaller than 4/4, which is exactly what we did, guys. You have to understand that 4/4 is 1 whole, but 3/4 is smaller than that. And then Justin's work, Justin estimated. So as you can kind of tell, he estimated. And then when it came to underlining the smallest one, he once again just looked at this first factor. And 3/4 is smaller than 4/4, so therefore that would be the least one. Now, before we go in and we summarize, your keyword is Super Bowl because we are Super Bowl champs. And you have tomorrow off at school, so hopefully you really listen to my whole lesson tonight. And it says, please summarize your own thinking below your work and be ready to share your problem-solving method in class tomorrow. Your summarizing is not I circled and underlining. Your summarizing is actually making sense of at least looking at which one was the least. How did you know which one was the least? Looking at those fractions that made that stand out.